Our castle is in the Scottish Highlands, and no, it's not under siege, it's actually under repair. But I can tell you that behind this scaffolding we have something pretty much identical to this on the end of the roof. Castles can be a challenge because while the main shape is often relatively simple, they're usually made up of lots and lots of stones. And how do we represent the stones? It can be such a tricky issue that it can put us off drawing castles and similar buildings altogether, which is such a shame because they are such great structures. So once we've drawn the outline, I'll show you my technique for rendering the stonework on a castle such as this. Well, I managed to not turn the camera on for my start, but I started with this curved line here, then came down and did this line and this line, measuring the angles before I drew them with my pen, as you possibly know I like to do, and this angle as well. And I just established something of this ground level line here. So I'll continue to work. I might do this section first and then move over to this further section. I've sped up the rest of the drawing part of this video to double time because while the technique I used for drawing stone is, I think, very simple and straightforward, it does take a little bit more time than most other elements of this drawing. So as to keep this video to the 10 minutes that I'm wanting to keep all the videos in this Easy Drawings for Beginners series to 10 minutes, double speed was necessary. But it's still certainly easy to see what I'm doing with that timing. So I'm establishing the main parts of the castle that we can see, the chimneys, the roofs. But let's face it, mostly this castle is this big stone wall that wraps around it, certainly from this point of view, and this massive rounded corner. So that's going to be the focal point of our drawing. And the fact that we're looking from below the level of the castle looking up accentuates the massiveness of the wall. So we do want to have a reasonable technique to represent it somehow. You can see me just checking some of the angles again with my pen, as I do like to do for virtually any line that isn't straight. Popping in the details. These chimney pots on top of these chimneys were a bit tricky because they were large enough that they were significant to draw, but it was still a fair amount of detail to fit in the line work in the space and not to just end up having it being a bit of a black mess. So that's always the challenge, using a certain thickness of line, that our lines don't get so close together in trying to draw detail that they all start to merge and just give us a blackness, unless of course that's what we wanted. So trying to also create a different texture here for the grassy slope in front of the castle, just so that it's very different. Creating different line work for different materials is a really good way of both helping people to separate the various components of the scene, but also to provide a bit of visual interest as well with our marks. Now it's important with these windows to make sure they follow the correct perspective angles. I'm just putting a couple of major openings in this corner before I move on to do the rest of the building. This rather large structure at what here is the back corner. I finished up having a fair bit of trouble with these sections that were hidden by the scaffolding, I must admit. There was once or twice where I didn't align the corners in the best way, which then made it difficult to get the part that was hidden by the scaffolding. I was a bit distracted with trying to fit it onto the page before I ran into my reference photo. So if anyone's going to be encouraged by thinking that I don't get it right every time, then be encouraged. I think one of my greatest skills actually is not so much drawing correctly all the time, but learning to disguise my mistakes. And I hope you'll think at the end of this drawing that I have managed to disguise some of the inaccuracies in this section that I'm drawing right now. And of course, no one's going to compare my drawing to the reference photo unless I want them to by showing them the reference. So the important thing is that my drawing itself looks credible, and that's why things such as perspective angles being correct are so important, because they will look wrong whether someone's looking at the reference photo or not if they are wrong. So putting this doorway in the castle wall in place, and now the other foreground elements. I don't want to start doing the stonework till I have all of the castle in place, because I can't really get a sense of how much detail I want to use, I want to show of the stones if I don't have a sense of the entire structure, because how they're going to look will depend on where exactly they are. Now we can see that there are sort of rows of stones, but sort of not, and that's what makes it particularly tricky. So what I do is I put some dotted lines to give myself an indication of how these rows are going to go with the alignment and the perspective of the wall. It's not that they're meant to be stones, but I can draw my stones, my rocks, around them as I'm doing now, but the dots won't stand out. I'm not particularly trying to cover them at all, but I do want to use them to do some rows, some rough rows, approximate rows of stones. If I'd drawn straight lines, they would have stood out at the end and just looked in some sort of clash with my other line work. Now this corner, this rounded corner that I'm doing now, is actually the part of the castle that's closest to us. So I want to do the largest stones there, the clearest stones there, and probably the most stones there, because that's what we're going to see most clearly if we're looking at the castle in life. And as I move further away from this closest point, I want the stones to become a bit lighter, a bit looser, a bit less well defined. Now, as they go around the curve to the right-hand side, that wall actually curves away more sharply than the left-hand wall, which means that I'm seeing those stones more edge on. So they're going to become narrower and narrower. In fact, you'll notice that a lot of them, if not most of them, I actually start to draw just by doing vertical lines. There's not much width, there's not much horizontalness to them, because that all gets foreshortened away. But I do want to do some lines, in inverted commas, of stones moving along, or at least dots and dashes, to show that there are level courses of these stones in the castle wall. You'll see I don't do much at all on the extreme left hand side, just a few dots to indicate that, yeah, there are stones there. But it also gives a sense of the castle being larger, because the detail is too overwhelming, it's just too large to try and draw it all. And now I do a bit more contrast here in the front. And I'll put some detail of the roof on this closer roof, but not the further one. And there we have it. So if you'd like to have a go at drawing this, I'll post it on my YouTube channel Community Page. G'day, I'm Stephen Travers. But whatever you're drawing and however you're drawing it, I hope you have fun. I'll see you next time.